Now, I'm going to pause here because I know that you're going to be mad at me. I know you're going to be mad at me for saying all of this factual information. I know what you're going to say. I know what you want to say. But Iran supports Palestine. They support Gaza. The Houthis support Gaza. What are you talking about, Shahid? Yes, the Houthis have launched drones against Israel. Yes, they have. I don't say they didn't. They disrupted the shipping lanes in the Red Sea in support of Gaza. Yes, they did. They did that. They also massacred Muslims in Yemen. Iran supported Hamas. Yes, they did for a while when they were exclusively a fighting force. But they dropped Hamas the second that they became a government. And they dropped them when they refused to follow Iran's orders and go fight for Bashar al-Assad against the Muslims. They dropped them for that. And they did not support Hamas. They did not support Hamas and they did not support Gaza financially since almost 20 years ago. As I said before, Hezbollah, for example, that you all love, was not created for Palestine. It was created to try to gain control over Lebanon. And the Houthis were not supported because of any support that they had for Palestine. They were supported exclusively to gain control and to gain influence in Jazirat al-Arab. So let's be factual here. Let's tell the truth. Okay, Houthis launched attacks that impacted Israel. Hezbollah has done so as well. And also, both groups have slaughtered thousands upon thousands of Muslims. And furthermore, Hamas's unwillingness to slaughter other Muslims for the sake of Bashar al-Assad upon the orders of Iran, they got dropped by Iran over that. Look, Iranian posturing, and even their actual acts against Israel that are just recent, that doesn't put 22,000 Iraqi Muslims back in their homes. That doesn't unkill all of the Syrians who were murdered by those Iranian militias, Iranian-backed militias. No, Iran has more Muslim blood on their hands than any country in the region that calls itself Muslim. That's not provocation. This is just accounting. This is just honest accounting, whether you like it or not. And here's what makes it worse. Iran built its entire political identity, its entire claim to global sympathy, Muslim sympathy, on the narrative of resistance, on the image that they're standing up against Zionism, standing up against imperialism and so forth, on the language of Islamic brotherhood and the language of Islamic solidarity and so on and so forth, while running death squads against Muslims in Baghdad, in Syria, in Lebanon, and in Yemen. Death squads. Okay, these two things cannot coexist in an honest analysis. You cannot present yourself as the defender of Muslim life while your proxies are ethnically cleansing Muslim neighborhoods by the thousands. No, I'm sorry, you cannot claim Islamic solidarity while pouring money and pouring weapons into a regime that is barrel bombing its own Muslim population. Yes, okay, the Gulf states get condemned, and sometimes fairly, criticized fairly sometimes for their involvement in Sudan, in Libya, in Yemen, and so forth. And those criticisms should be made when they can be made fairly, which you all almost never can do. But you should at least try to bring that same energetic criticism against Tehran for their decades upon decades of crimes against the Muslims. Because your selective outrage is not analysis, it's tribalism, it's sectarianism, and that's what got us here in the first place. But then you can also look at Syria. Okay, everyone knows in 2011 the Syrians rose up against Bashar al-Assad. And everyone understands what they were rising up for, why they were rising up, and everyone understands who was rising up. It was the Muslims who were rising up, ordinary people. People who had been living under a very brutal Alawi dictatorship for decades, a sectarian dictatorship, and they wanted dignity. They wanted freedom. They wanted what all human beings want and what all human beings deserve. And Iran looked at that uprising and they made a calculation. They said Bashar al-Assad has to survive. Not because Bashar al-Assad was good, not because the Syrian people didn't deserve better, didn't deserve their freedom, but because without Syria, their land corridor to Hezbollah collapses. Without Syria, Iran's regional empire loses its geographic spine. So they poured in. Iran poured in. They poured Hezbollah in from Lebanon, poured in sectarian militants from Iraq, sectarian Afghani fighters who were recruited under desperate circumstances and shipped to Syria. The IRGC itself was directing operations on the ground. Billions of dollars, upwards of $16 billion between 2012 and 2020, they spent to just keep that vicious dictator in power over people who were begging to be free from him and who had every right to be free from him. What happened in Aleppo? Do you even remember? Iran's generals were celebrating it as a strategic victory, while the whole world was horrified by the civilian casualties. Iran's senior military aide to their so-called supreme leader went on television bragging about the so-called liberation that they had achieved. That's the word he used, liberation. I'm asking liberation for who? For who? For the Muslim civilians who were being killed in their homes? For the Muslim families that were being starved in the suburbs that were completely besieged? Do you know that the United Nations Commission of Inquiry documented indiscriminate bombing in Aleppo, indiscriminate bombing in East Ghouta, a suburb of Damascus with 250,000 people. The forces of Bashar al-Assad, backed by Iran, backed by Hezbollah, laid siege until the people surrendered. They made them suffer until they surrendered, and more than 400,000 Syrians died in that war. Half the country was displaced. And the overwhelming majority of the dead, the overwhelming majority of the displaced was Muslims. Overwhelmingly. Iran didn't just fail to protect them. No, Iran was the one who killed them. Yes, they are. Iran's the one who killed them. And then you can look at Yemen. This is another one. This is another one that you all like to misrepresent when you talk about Iran. Yemen was already the poorest country in the whole Arab world. They were already fragile. They were already struggling. They were already suffering. And Iran took the Houthi sectarian movement that already existed. It was a homegrown political force. They had real grievances. I don't say that they didn't. They had real grievances, but they turned them into an instrument of Iranian regional power. Weapons, training, strategic direction, all flowing from Tehran. This marvelous axis of resistance. What was the result? A completely destroyed country, a humanitarian catastrophe, children dying of cholera, children dying of famine, not as the side effect of someone else's war. We're talking about as the direct consequence of a conflict that Iran actively engineered, actively sustained, and actively prolonged because it served Iranian strategic interests.